Good evening. We're going to get started in another minute while we let everybody get in. So please bear with us while we get going. Good evening. I am Gary Starr. I'm the chair of the Greater Hartford Jewish Community Relations Council. I want to thank you for attending tonight's presentation by Avi Melamed on Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era. Both the Hartford and New Haven Jewish Federations believe that knowing more about what is happening in the Middle East, and particularly Israel, will not only be informative, but we hope that it will end any hesitation you may have about joining us in Israel in March on our great adventure. One of the missions of JCRC is to educate the public about Israel and its place in the Middle East. For me, Avi Melamed has long been my source for understanding that world. I have the great pleasure to introduce you to someone who has been in Connecticut so many times we've all lost count, but he is going to touch on and make us more aware of what the present situation is. By way of background, Avi Melamed is a former Israeli intelligence official, senior official on Arab affairs, and has served as the Salisbury Fellow of Intelligence and Middle East Affairs at the Eisenhower Institute in Washington, D.C. He is an expert on current affairs in the Arab and Muslim world and their impact on Middle East and Israel's geopolitical environment. In his public service, Avi has held high-risk government, senior advisory, and counter-terrorist intelligence positions. His field and operational experience, his profound knowledge, and his intimate connections throughout the Arab world has taken him to the alleys and streets of the Arab world, as well as the corridors of halls of power in Washington, D.C. This has been possible as he is fluent in Arabic, English, and Hebrew. As an Israeli Jew, he has a unique understanding of Arab society and culture. Avi has his finger on the pulse of the Arab world, and his outstanding record of foreseeing the evolution of events in the Middle East has really been outstanding. Avi has co-authored Separate and Unequal, Israel's Rule of East Jerusalem, and written Ubrusi, the novel. His latest book, Inside the Middle East, Making Sense of the Most Dangerous and Complicated Region on Earth, is a guide to help navigate the dramatically changing Middle East. Not to be bored by any means, he is now creating a 6-part documentary on Jerusalem. And tonight he will share his insights on Inside the Middle East. Avi?
Thank you. Gary, thank you so much for your very kind presentation. I do have a very special place in my heart for Hartford, New Haven. As you mentioned, I've been there more than once, and as always, it's a great privilege for me to be given the stage for hopefully add knowledge and understanding, and I'm very thankful for that. Just one more add, actually, the presentation tonight, named Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era, is in fact a sort of a digest, if you wish, or synopsis of my recent book, which bears the same name, Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era, that was recently published in February 2022. So this will be the essence of my presentation tonight. And as I said, I'm very thankful and honored for the opportunity I'm given. So as we move on, and I would like to enter talking about this book and actually the essence of this book, I would kind of like, as a framing, I would say that in my presentation tonight, we would try to understand together why is the Middle East entering a new era and what is the shape of that new era looks like. In that sense, I would like to start by framing and pointing up the following points. We are actually looking at a Middle East that is going through an interesting transition, and it's a very interesting conjunction of couple of factors that coincide together in that specific time to create and generate that shift. One is the balanced power between different regional forces, The second one is the structured geostrategic landscape. The third one is the struggle for a new model of statehood in the Arab world. And the fourth one is the end of Western hegemony and entering the era of what I called Pax China, if you wish, if I can use this terminology to illustrate the change of the region. So let me start with the first factor, the balance of power between different regional powers. Just to put some kind of like an historical framing, because you can't understand the Middle East without understanding some major powers that shape the history of the Middle East. I'm always saying that the history in the Middle East is very much present. So roughly speaking, there are two major power struggles that shape the Middle East. One is a power struggle that took place within Islam itself, the major religion of the Middle East. This is a power struggle that took place between two camps of Islam. One is the Sunni camp, which is the majority. Sunnis are about 83% of the Muslims. And the other camp, minority, known as the Shi'at Ali, the political faction of Ali. To make a long story short, both camps are actually differ and argue regarding the question who is entitled to lead the Muslim world. Sunni argues that it should be done by the person that has the right skills and virtues to do that job, while the Shiites argue that that position should be done only by a male descendant of the fourth caliph, the fourth king of Islam, Ali bin Abu Talib. That split that actually took place in the 7th century continued and escalated and deepened through the centuries. And actually the relationship between Sunnis and Shiites in Islam all along history are mostly characterized by mutual animosity and disagreements between the two camps, though they are both, as I said before, Muslims. That power struggle is very significant, and shortly we will see how it is very much relevant to many things that happen today in the Middle East. The second thing that I would like to talk about in the context of the power struggle is the power struggle between three major civilizations that are the major civilizations in the Middle East. One is the Arab civilization, who actually gave birth to Islam. Islam emerged from the Arab civilization, even though today, as a fact, majority of the Muslims in the world are not Arabs. They don't speak Arabic, they are not from the Arab Peninsula. Just the same, Arabs gave birth to Islam, and most of the Arab Muslims are Sunni Muslims. The second civilization is the Persian civilization. The Persian civilization is rather known today by the name of Iran. At the beginning was actually a competing civilization to Islam, to the Arab civilization. And at some point, the Persian civilization adopted Islam. At first, it adopted the Sunni version of Islam, but later on in medieval times, it actually changed into Shiite formation. So roughly speaking, we got an Arab predominantly Sunni civilization, a Persian predominate Shiite civilization, and the third civilization is the Turkish civilization. The Turks are neither Arabs nor Persians. They don't speak Arabic, they don't speak Farsi, they speak Turkish. Most of the Turks are Sunni Muslims, so you got three major civilizations: Arab predominantly Sunni, Persian predominantly Shiites, and Turkish predominantly Sunnis as well. And all along history, they have been competing for power, dominance, prestige, and so on and so on. So that was kind of like a general historical, sort of speaking, framing, talking about these two axes of power struggle, the power struggle within Islam and the power struggle between the civilizations, the major civilizations of the region. And now I'm jumping to our times, to the 20th century. I would say that the major thing that happened among different things in the Middle East was the fact that the people of the Middle East were introduced in the 20th century, following the downfall of the Turkish Ottoman Empire, to the concept of national statehood. That concept and the power struggle it evoked in the region, to a large extent, basically defined the trajectory of the region during the 20th century, and that was not very successful trajectory. The reason it wasn't successful trajectory was that from the first day this concept was introduced to the people of the Middle East, most of whom are Arabs, and as I said, Sunni Muslims, there has been an ongoing debate, power struggle within the societies of the region regarding the question, what should be exactly the nature or the features of that political entity, which to a large extent was a totally alien concept for most of the people in the region. The issue of national statehood was something that was totally alien and unfamiliar to the people of the region. These are people in the region that are historically, traditionally, define themselves according to their tribal belonging, family belonging, ethnicity, religion, geographical origin, and so on and so on. So the attempt to create a national statehood that actually brings together different groups, different sects, sometimes not so much friendly one to the other, the attempt to bring them together under a flag that is called national statehood, to start with, was a very, very challenging process. And into that mixture, we got different concepts, different ideas, different ideologies that appeared in the context of, okay, what should be the feature of such entity? So you could find a camp that is totally rejecting the idea of an independent national statehood. For example, the Islamic Caliphate supporters camps, who totally reject the idea of national statehood. Alternatively, they envision a world that is governed in a frame of what is called caliphate, one big global entity that is ruled according to the Islamic religious law codex, rather known as Sharia law. You got a camp who support national statehood. You got a camp that support the idea that used to be known, particularly in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, as the pan-Arab vision, an idea that actually speak about bringing all the Arab nations together under one umbrella, and that could be some sort of like the major feature of a potential statehood, which is one that includes all the Arab-speaking nations. And then you got camps that is basically a totally sectarianism camp. It's kind of like a camp that is unable to define the common denominators that actually can bring together the different sects, the different groups, to create something that is bigger than the sum of its all components. The bottom line of this process was that in the end of the day, the experiment, sort of speaking, of a statehood in the Middle East, when you screen briefly the picture in the Middle East, you could see very clearly that was a failure. Almost totally across the Middle East, time and again, we saw the same picture. Brutal dictators and dictatorships are coming to power because there is an inability to create a common denominators, a consensus that is built in a peaceful and productive way to create sort of a national statehood. The outcome is you got an inner power struggle within the sectors that assembled that national statehood, and the tougher you are, the stronger you are, you have the better chance to sit on top of this pile. And that's exactly what happened across the Middle East when you look at the whole sectors of the Middle East, excluding the whole parts of the monarchies in the Middle East, particularly the one in the Arab Gulf monarchies. The bottom line of that was that the needs of the people were unattended, they were unaddressed, because the rulers, the dictators, the military powers that took over control were mostly engaged in securing their own endurance in power. The bottom line was accumulating process of discontent, anger of the people, because their needs were unattended. About a decade ago, a little bit more, in 2010, this massive volcano that from time to time was erupting, 10 years ago or so, a little bit more than that, there was a super volcanic eruption, rather known by the name of the Arab Spring, where a huge wave of protest is basically swinging through the Arab world. Dozens and dozens of millions of people are out there. Dictators, governments that ruled for decades were overthrown overnight. And in essence, the essence of the Arab Spring is the outcry of the people in the Arab world who demand their rulers and governments to provide them with real answers to real problems. We want running water, we want electricity, we want medical services, we want functioning educational system, we want security, we want street lights, we want all those little things, quote unquote, that in the end of the day, life is made of. And the Arab Spring sends this enormous aftershock waves that continues to shake the region from side to side, and their implications and ramifications and consequences are going to echo many, many years ahead. This is something very significant that we have to take into consideration when we talk about the story of the failure of the statehood in the Middle East. When this process is happening in the Arab world, remember we talked about the traditional rivalries of the Arab world, the Persian civilization, the Turkish civilization. Both identify a great opportunity to enhance and promote their interests because their traditional rivalry, the Arab civilization, is now crumbling and stumbling and dealing with huge major challenges. And this is the time of both Iran and Turkey to move forward to enhance and achieve achievements at the expense, as we'll see shortly, mostly of the Arab world. Let me start shortly with the Iranian regime. In 1979, a very significant development in the Middle East, Iran becomes a Shiite theocracy, the Islamic Republic of Iran, under the leadership of the mullahs regime. Mullahs are the Shiite clergies, and they are actually structured like officers in the army. You got different ranks of mullahs. You may be familiar with one of the most significant, of course, of them, Ruhollah Ayatollah Khomeini, the founder of the Islamic Revolution in Iran. Ayatollah is not his name. This is actually his rank, sort of speaking. By the way, the word Ayatollah means, it's two words, which means the sign of God. In 1979, the mullah regime comes to power in Iran. There is something very significant to understand about that specific regime. That specific regime, which is very, very radical one, is motivated by a revolutionary outlook of the world, of history of mankind, and the way they envision the future of mankind. That outlook is fueled by some deep narratives that are embedded within the Shiite belief. And one of the most significant of those narratives is the one that argued that actually Shiites were supposed to lead the Muslim world, not Sunnis. One of the major narratives of the Shiites argued that with the killing of Al-Hussein bin Ali, the son of the fourth caliph, who also was the last male grandson of Prophet Muhammad in the year 680, in this event, Shiites argue that basically that event marks the point of time where the crown of leadership that was allegedly, and I emphasize the word allegedly, the crown of leadership that was belonging to the Shiites was taken from them by their loathed enemies, the Sunnis. And now, in 1979, when the mullah regime comes to power in Iran, that regime, fueled by that sentiment, is moving forward in enhancing an expansion policy, starting with the region of the Middle East, but not ending in the region of the Middle East. And that expansion policy, rather known as the expansion of the Islamic Revolution. The philosophy beyond that concept basically says that through the expansion of the Islamic Revolution, the Shiites will recapture, according to the Shiites' belief, they will recapture the crown of leadership that will mark their ultimate triumph on their ancient rivalries, the Arab Sunnis, and also that will validate the perspective of the Shiites, who argue that there is a divine master plan to mankind in which Shiites are supposed to be playing the role of the leadership. So, fueled by those narratives, the mullah regime has been, particularly in the last couple of decades, starting to promote a very aggressive expansion policy across the Middle East. That expansion policy was titled by the King of Jordan, the current King of Jordan, Abdullah II, already back in 2004. He alarmed and warned of what he called the Shiite Crescent. And he actually says, look, the mullah regime is enhancing and implementing a program or a project or a vision that's supposed to create a Shiite crescent. You could see that in front of you on this map, and that crescent actually is going through major Arab states, starting in Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, going down through the Gulf area, Bahrain, Yemen, and even continuing entering parts of Africa. Later on, by the way, King Abdullah II changed the name from Shiite Crescent to the Iranian Crescent, but it is the same concept and the same idea that he has presented before. Today in 2022, the mullah regime is actually saying to the Arab world very openly, we, Iran, we control 4 Arab capitals. They say we control Lebanon, we control Syria, we control Iraq, we control Yemen, and we also control Gaza Strip. Though it is in a way an exaggeration, it is definitely not baseless. Iran truly controls, to a large extent, Lebanon. Lebanon became an Iranian satellite. Iran militarily occupies part of Syria, either directly or through its Iranian-backed militias. Iran has very strong influence in Iraq through a local Iraqi Shiite militias that are Iraqis, but actually subject to the Iranian order. In Yemen, the Iranian regime is supporting a Shiite Yemenite conglomerate of tribes, rather known as Houthis, about 35% of the population, massively supported by Iran, particularly militarily speaking. So in that sense, the mullah regime can definitely mark in 2022 that his vision of expanding its control and influence through this Shiite crescent, that vision is actually moving forward. And then there is one last arena that we also mention in that context, and this is the Gaza Strip, where in the Gaza Strip, the mullah regime has sort of like presence and proxies on the ground in the shape of 2 major Palestinian military powers in Gaza Strip. One is Hamas, that controls Gaza Strip since 2007, and the second one, which is the second largest military organization in Gaza Strip after Hamas, and that is Islamic Jihad in Palestine. Reminding you, just recently in August, there was a short Israeli Islamic Jihad military collision for a couple of days in Gaza Strip. One of the major mechanisms that enabled the mullah regime to be so successful in enhancing its vision is the fact that the mullah regime was very effectively, efficiently, sophisticatedly taking advantage of a concept that is embedded within the Middle East terminology and dictionary, if I could say that. And this is a term called in Arabic al-muqawama wal-mumana'a, the resistance and the defiance. This is a concept, this is a philosophy that actually has been around for a couple of good decades, sort of speaking, but particularly in the last, I would say, generation, it has been mostly modified and attached to the story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. At the heart of this concept, there is this outlook that actually emphasizing Islam as a morally superior civilization that counters the weak, corrupted Western moral values, obviously, quote unquote. And that concept of the resistance in al-Muqawama emphasizes that the way for the people of the world, and particularly the Muslim world, to move forward, to heal and meet their challenges is by adopting the concept of the Muqawama and the defiance and the resistance. And one of the most central elements with that concept is the issue of liberating Palestine and elimination of the state of Israel. Because according to that outlook, as long as this goal is not achieved, the whole goal of al-Muqawama is an idea that is supposed to liberate, emancipation of the Muslim people, as long as the idea or the objective of eliminating Israel and liberating Palestine is not achieved, the whole concept of al-Muqawama is yet not to be fully fulfilled. Therefore, you can understand that the mullah regime positioned itself as the defender of the Palestinians in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, even though the mullah regime simply could not care less about the Palestinians. The Palestinians are 99.9% are Sunni Arabs. The mullah regime definitely has no special sentiment to the Palestinian, other than the fact that using the story of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict became one of the most effective tools at the service of the mullah regime. When you look at this map, you could actually see this crescent, this Shiite crescent. It was described by King Abdullah II, and you could see that it actually is composed of proxies, armed proxies that the mullah regime has either created, established, like, for example, its biggest, most powerful proxy in the region, known as the Hezbollah in Lebanon, or Iraqi Shiite militias that are acting in Iraq, but subdued to the orders of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, or in the case of Gaza Strip, proxies that were not established by the Iranians, like Hamas or Islamic Jihad, but actually became very useful tool in the service of the Iranian vision. They are aware of the Iranian vision. And though there are actually, in the end of the day, as I said before, ideological, religious, cultural differences, let alone to say animosity between Sunni Arabs and Persians and the Shiite regime, what brings together Hamas and Islamic Jihad, for example, with Iran and Hezbollah around the table as part of what is called as the axis of the resistance, is their commitment to eliminate the state of Israel. So we are looking at a conjunction of interest where for Hamas and Islamic Jihad, getting support from Iran, the money for the salaries of the militants, the weapons, the missiles, the rockets, the military know-how, is of course Hamas and Islamic Jihad interest, and the other way around. As long as Iran can continue and fuel the flames of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it serves the Iranian mullah regime because it gives them further excuse, sort of speaking, to continue their intervention in the Arab world, which, as I said before, in some cases became actually occupation of parts of the Arab world. And it's all being done under the big excuse that is called the resistance and the defiance. And by the way, in the Arab world, they finally woke up. They finally, most of the people, woke up and start to understand that the whole story of resistance and defiance was very cynically, very effectively, very sophisticatedly used by the mullah regime, first and foremost, not to liberate Palestine, but first and foremost to expand the control, the influence of the mullah regime at the expense of its traditional rivalries, the Arab Sunnis. And that brings us to another major player in the region we mentioned before, and this is Turkey. Now, Turkey, as I said before, Turkey is not Arab, neither Persian. But Turkey predominantly is Sunni. So in that context, there is a common denominator between Turkey and most of the Arab world, because as I said before, most of the Arabs are Sunnis as well. However, Turkish President Erdogan comes from the hub of the Islamic political ideology, and its mostly known representative is the Muslim Brotherhood, the biggest mass movement in the Muslim Sunni world. And Erdogan, leading a very Islamic-oriented policy, dramatically changed Turkey in the last couple of decades, actually diverting Turkey from once a nation that was by a constitution secular into a nation that has a very strong Sunni Islamic orientation. One of the major reasons to Erdogan policies, other than the fact that he is ideologically and spiritually coming from this hub, one of the major reasons for that is that Erdogan wishes to position himself as the leader of the Sunni camp in the Middle East for sure, and also to position itself as the frontline Sunni leader of the rest of the Sunni Muslims who are scattered in the world. Like the Iranian, Turkey and Erdogan obviously took advantage of the very shaky, turbulent situation in the Arab world, particularly in the shade of the story of the Arab Spring. And like Iran, Turkey took the opportunity, used the opportunity, took advantage of the situation to expand influence across the Middle East, the Gulf area, Central and North Africa. You could see this map in front of you that shows you the expansion of Turkey across the Middle East. You may notice that whenever you see this Turkish flag, in some places you could see also an idol, a figure of a soldier. That represents not only a Turkish growing influence, but also a Turkish military base, a direct military base or presence of Turkey in those locations. You could see in North Africa, in Libya, in Chad, in Niger, there is Turkish military presence. In North Syria, that has been torn apart in a war for the last 11 years, Turkey actually created a Turkish protectorate in the north and northwest part of Syria. In the Gulf state, Turkey has a presence in Qatar, a military presence. In Somalia, Turkey has a presence which is enormously significant, given to the strategic location of the Horn of Africa next to the Indian Ocean and the Bab el-Mandab Strait. In other words, similar to Iran, though motivated by different perspectives than the Iranians, Turkey also took advantage of the very shaky, unstable situation in the Arab world to enhance its hegemonic vision, to enhance its objectives and plans, again, yet similar to the Iranian, at the expense of the Arab world. And once again, like the Iranians, Turkey also very sophisticatedly and effectively used the card, the pawn that is called the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But again, like the Iranian, Turkey couldn't care less about the Palestinians. As long as standing by the Palestinian or echoing the right slogans serves Turkey's political and strategic interests, they will do that. The day it's irrelevant, they will basically change their skin, and we saw that more than once in different occasions. And by the way, in the last 2 years or so, given to a growing economic challenges in Turkey, political challenges, Turkey changed melody and tune, basically starting to re-establish or to rebuild its damaged relationship with the major Arab players like Egypt, like Saudi Arabia, like United Arab Emirates. And also, as you probably noticed, Turkey changed melody and tune in the context of Israel. Not so long ago, Turkey used Israel and anti-Israeli, I would say even venomous anti-Israel rhetoric to serve Turkey's interest. Today, it's totally different melodies. Today, Israel and Turkey renew their diplomatic relationship in the level of ambassadors. Turkey is singing the praise of Israel, a growing cooperation, and so on and so on. That gives you a good glimpse of the stage or the game of power in the Middle East. So if you look at the map of the Middle East vis-a-vis the hegemonic vision of both Iran and Turkey, you could see the map in front of you. You could see the flags of Iran, you could see the flag of Turkey, and you could see how actually they have been taking advantage of the weakness of the Arab world, the disintegration of the Arab world and political structure of the Arab world in order to enhance their presence, their power, their influence, and note that is mostly at the expense of an Arab states and Arab countries. As you could understand, it has evoked a counter-reaction in the Arab world that is escalating and growing. And right now, for example, one of the major significant development in the region is that you look at 3 Arab states, Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq, who actually sits on the same line, sort of speaking. You could see them bordering one next to the other. And the common denominator, one of the common denominators of Lebanon, Syria, and Iraq that are all struggling with many challenges, one of the common denominator is that they are actually, to a large extent, fighting for their independence as they are trying to get free of the suffocating Iranian grip. It may be too late for Lebanon. It's not clear what will happen in that context in Syria. In Iraq, we could see this power struggle. And this is one example of the outcome of this expansion of the Iranian at the expense of the weakening and crumbling some Arab states. So all in all, when you look at the story of the region today vis-a-vis that perspective of the Iranian and Turkish expansion vision, you could notice there are a couple of major arenas in the region. Some of them are naval arenas, some of them are land arenas that actually became part of continuing and escalating and growing, intensifying power struggle across the region. Starting in the area of the Mediterranean Sea, you could see it in the upper part of the map. The eastern basin of the Mediterranean Sea is enormously significant strategically for two major reasons. One, it is the connecting point between the Indian Ocean to the south, vis-a-vis, of course, the Suez Canal that crossed for Egypt, and Europe to the north. And the second reason is that the eastern basin of the Mediterranean contains huge amount of natural gas, obviously something that is enormously significant in the global economy, in the global politics. We all are aware of that. The second arena is also a naval arena. This is the Red Sea that connects between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean. One of the most significant passages, water passages in the world. And in the lower part, in the southern part of the Red Sea, one of the most strategic locations on this planet, the narrow Bab el-Mandab Strait that actually divides between Africa to the left-hand side and Asia to the right-hand side, a very narrow passage, huge amount of commercial activities, ships, oil tankers, and so on, is crossing through this enormously significant crossing, this bottleneck, as I call it. As you could see, it's very clear why. So this is another arena that becomes more and more an arena for growing frictions and power struggle. The fourth one is also a naval arena. This is the Hormuz Strait, the Persian or Arab Gulf, depends who defines it. Again, the major passage for crude oil from this region, and particularly South to Southeast Asia, to the major consumer of the oil, China and India. So you see four major arenas, naval arenas, that become a stage for a growing friction and power struggle between different players. And then you see the land corridor, the Iranian land corridor. I've talked about it before. Iran is trying to establish a land corridor that actually will fix its control over the whole region stretching west of Iran all the way towards the Mediterranean Sea. As I mentioned before, Lebanon today, offshore the Mediterranean Sea, is to a large extent an Iranian satellite. It is occupied by the Iranians in a remote control by the Hezbollah. Gaza Strip is under significant Iranian influence. Syria, partly occupied by the Iranians. In Iraq, Iraqi-based Shiite militias that are financed by the Iraqi government, that got their weapons from the Iraqi government, that their members are being paid salaries from the Iraqi government. The irony is that those militias are following the orders of Iran at the expense of their own brothers, the Iraqi Shiites in Iraq. And one of the things that we just see in Iraq, just recently we had some example of that, is this huge power struggle in Iraq, one of the most significant countries in the region and in the world. A huge power struggle between the Iraqi nationalists that wants to get free of the Iranian deadly grip and the Iranian affiliators that actually wants to maintain Iran holds in Iraq. This is one of the major power struggles that shakes and shapes this region. the outcome and ramifications of that story of the Iranian land corridor is enormously significant in the context of the region and beyond. That brings us to talk about the restructured geostrategical landscape of the region. So we talked about the challenges that the Iranian expansion, that the Turkish expansion and vision, hegemonic vision, presents to the people of the region, particularly, again, most of them are Sunni Arabs, majority of the people in the Middle East. Adding to that, we have to add some major inner challenges of these Arab states, rather, or in addition to the failure or the very shaky attempt to create functioning statehood in the Arab world. If that's not enough, as we said before, the outcome of that was that the needs of the people were unaddressed. And today, when the Arab states are trying to address the inner challenges, they actually need to totally reprioritize their political agenda, their strategic objectives, their needs, their interests. And in that new shaped list, on top of the list is the need, in the end of the day, to adjust their people, their societies to the 21st century, meaning to find ways to diverse the income, revenues, and sources, including, I would even say, particularly when you are talking about the Gulf monarchies who enjoy this enormous wealth as an outcome of the gas and the oil. Yet there is an understanding that at some point it's going to run out, and there is a need to create a new modern income sources and revenue sources. This is one thing that really keep the Arab governments and rulers busy with. You take a state like an Egypt. Egypt is 110 million people or something like that. The challenges of Egypt are enormous in every possible scale. The government in Egypt, President al-Sisi, are doing an enormous effort to really try and to address the challenges, the needs of the people, housing solutions and transportation solution and economic diversity and so on and so on. And that picture is all across the region, the needs of the people, the needs of the governments to adjust themselves to the challenges of the 21st century. That requires an enormous investments in educational system, in qualifying a workforce that is equipped with the skills, the tools, the knowledge to operate in a highly competitive, sophisticated environment of the 21st century. That requires huge investments in technological infrastructure, in educational infrastructure. On top of that, or in addition to that, we have to think about huge environmental challenges that the region is facing, namely issues of like the challenge of water, managing water, the reuse of water for domestic consumption as well as for agriculture consumption, challenges that has to do with climate change. These are all things that are enormously significant, and they basically add to this huge pile of challenges that has to be addressed. So all in all, we look and we see a situation where the Arab world has to adjust itself to these huge, enormous challenges on top of actually trying to push back and to deal with the Iranian and Turkish hegemonic vision. Under those circumstances, what we see is a new restructured priorities of the Arab world in terms of interest and objectives. And one of the interesting things that we see was that as an outcome of that, we saw an interesting development where Israel is now viewed by major Arab players as a very significant strategic partner, not because they became Zionist, but because Israel can offer them a lot in the context of addressing their huge challenges. It's a mutual beneficiary relationship. It's based upon long-term strategic interest. One of the manifestations of that development is, of course, the story of the Abraham Accord. So roughly speaking, when you go back and you look at the map of the Middle East, the one that actually presents to you the different arenas of power struggle, now you could see the flags of this, what I call the alliance of moderation, that actually is operating in the same arenas of frictions that I mentioned before. The four naval arenas, the eastern basin of the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandab Strait, the Indian Ocean, the Hormuz Strait, the Gulf area, and the land corridor, Iran's attempt to create this control stretching from Iran through Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. In all of those arenas, you will find this alliance of moderation trying to push back, to counter and balance, particularly Iran, but also Turkish hegemonic vision and aspiration. Another significant development that we, at least I can see today, is what I call the seeds for potential new statehood in the Middle East. You know, when volcano is erupting, it's always destructive, but at the same time, it's also constructive because the land it leaves beyond is very fertile. And in a sense, you could look at the story of the Arab Spring as this volcano that erupted, and along with the destruction also brings a fertile land for a change. And I think that I can see and indicate seeds of that change in the context of the story of statehood. Remember, in the 20th century, the failure of statehood in the Arab world is one of the major reasons for the gloomy situation. Today, when you look across the Arab world, you could see there are seeds for maybe the emerging of a new kind of a statehood model that will be more successful, relatively speaking, in comparison to the one of the 20th century. That said, we have to remember, this is a long and turbulent process. It's a process that takes a lot of tolls. It takes a lot of challenges. It brings with it a lot of turbulences and difficulties. And we see that across the region. We see that in Algeria, and in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Sudan, in Jordan, in Kuwait, and other places. Yet at the same time, it bears, at least potentially, the seeds for a change, for a positive change. And the essence of this change is that major factors today that assemble the political and social maps of Arab states, namely the governments, civil society factors, political Islam factors, particularly Muslim Brotherhood, are actually kind of like more able, relatively speaking, in comparison to the 20th century, to define common denominator and to be able to work, at least potentially, for the good of the idea of the state in the center. And this is a process that we see across the Middle East. It moves ahead in a different pace, in different locations, in different intensity. The common denominator is that it's a very turbulent process. But it's interesting to note this process because, of course, potentially it can bear a lot of ramifications and implications, hopefully mostly positive in the context of the restructured, sort of speaking, Middle East. The story of the end of the Western hegemony and the entering of what I call the era of the Pax China, or the rising giants from the East, China and India. It's very interesting, just very briefly, to see the differences between the Western policy, foreign policy, and the Chinese foreign policy. While Western policy is identified as one that always navigating or trying to navigate it between two camps that sometimes are not going together, so to speaking, ideal politic camp versus the real politic. When you look at the Western policy, you see it's multi-focus. It has different arenas of interest and priorities. It's decentralized. It's not only governmental oriented. There are many other agencies and organizations that are also carrying their agenda of foreign policy. And it's, when you look particularly in the context of the Middle East, you could notice there is a gradual disengagement of major Western policy players that used to play a very significant and still play a significant role in the Middle East. But you could definitely see that in the end of the day, the outcome of that process is this declining hegemony of the West in the Middle East. We are in a time where the Middle East doesn't, where the Western powers does not have any more this, exclusivity, sort of speaking, hegemony that they enjoyed through large parts of the 20th century in the region. On the other hand, when you look at the Chinese foreign policy, you could see it's the totally opposite. It's nothing to do with ideal politics. It's real politics. It's a very singular focused policy that aims to achieve China's two most significant strategic interests: energy security and food security. This is the most important thing for China. We can understand, of course, why. It's very centralized foreign policy. It's not scattered. It's very laser focused. And China is rapidly increasing its engagement in the Middle East. That map shows you China's big vision of one belt, one road strategic plan, where China basically wants to tie the whole world to China through a network of both land and naval passages and corridors. The Middle East is enormously significant to China, not only because it provides huge amount of the oil that China needs to maintain its needs for energy security, but also because of its location between the Southeast Asia and Europe, the trade routes, the shipping, and so on and so on. Therefore, it's not surprising at all to see that China is increasing its presence in the region through huge investments in infrastructure, in communication systems, transportation system. The Chinese are massively invested in the Middle East. In every possible way, they are increasing their investment in the Middle East. And in that context, it's very interesting to notice that Israel captured a very significant place in the Chinese big vision. Israel is enormously valuable for China for different reasons, because of its position offshore the Mediterranean, because of its sophisticated, advanced technological, military, economic capacities. Israel is very valuable to China, and Israel, reminding you, is maybe some small village when you are comparing it to China in terms of population. Obviously, this is a striking fact when you look around it. So you could see that China is increasing its presence across the Middle East, and the Chinese do not give free meals, as you could all understand. So if you go back to the map we saw before, and now it gives you the whole layers. You see the Iranian, the Turkish expansion vision and actions. You see the alliance of moderation trying to balance this expansion policy of the major rivalries of the Arab civilization, the Sunni one, Iran on the one hand, Turkey on the other hand. You see China's presence on this map. You could see the base it has in Israel, the base it has in the Gulf area. That map shows you these many layers of this restructured geostrategic reality that I have been just describing to you. And now when you see this map and you see the layers of this map and the factors involved in this reshaping, restructuring the Middle East, you can understand why do I say the Middle East is entering a new era. And just before concluding my presentation, here are some of my predictions. As a short note, I would mention that, as I said before, my recent book, Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era, was published in February 2022. Mind that the writing of the book was concluded exactly 1 year ago, in September 2021. At this point, I'm humbly saying that the predictions that I'm providing in this book, as of now, all of the predictions are accurate. So I hope that in a way it will give an additional validity to the predictions that I would like to share with you. These are the major predictions that I provide. A complex equilibrium between regional forces, resulting, among other things, the strengthening and the foundations of the Abraham Accord. In that sense, I would say I do not foresee in the near visible future joining of other GCC countries, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, and Oman, to the frame of the Abraham Accord, but I definitely foresee, and I think it's happening, the deepening relation between Israel and some of those factors, namely mostly in areas that are of a super interest of those countries. You can understand, of course, that in course of time, it's going to increase. And by the way, the Gulf states, the neighbors of Iran, are not interested in fighting Iran. They're interested in having a good relationship with Iran. And they are saying to the Iranians, look, we want to have a good neighbors relationship. We just want you to stop intervening in our inner affairs. United Arab Emirates and Iran recently renewed their diplomatic relations and levels of ambassadors. It will be very likely the case at some point with Saudi Arabia, and of course, others Arab Gulf monarchies. Qatar, Oman, Kuwait are already having a regular, normal relationship with Iran. That said, it would not be at the expense of strengthening at the same time their relationship with Israel, because the Arab Gulf monarchies know exactly what the Mullah regime is. They have a lot of concerns, and rightly so. They will not drop the card of having a good friend like Israel at the back room is something that counter the potential danger and threat that the Mullah regime presents to the Arab states' monarchies. Other thing that I envision, the potential emergence of a new statehood model in some Arab states. I think that we could see this process happening again in places like Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, Sudan, Egypt, Kuwait. As I said, it's a gradual process. It's intensified in different capacities, vary from place to place, but I think it happens and takes place. So it should be closely monitored and noticed. In that context, for example, I would like to note Jordan, which is going through some very significant challenges, both internally and externally. And in that sense, the Jordanian monarchy, of course, this is something that is enormously significant in the context of Israel. The other thing that I would like to talk about as a prediction is the continuation and unrest of turbulence that will continue, again, due to the huge challenges of the region that I mentioned before in my briefing. And as I mentioned before, the end of the Western hegemony and the rise of China and India is what I call the giants from the East that are going to play more and more significant role in the newly structured shape of the Middle East. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I conclude my presentation, and I'm opening this session for the Q&A part.
Wow. Well, thank you, Avi. That was another amazing educational experience for all of us, and you absolutely never disappoint. And as many times as I've had the good pleasure of hearing you, and now it's spanning decades, I'm happy to say I always learn something new. And we didn't know you were like the amazing Crescent of the Middle East. I don't know if you know who that is, but for those of us in the States, your predictions are quite remarkable. I want to encourage our friends here to put their questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to take a few questions because we know that the hour is late, but we know that folks have interest in that. And let me just check and see if we have any there now. So while you're catching your breath a little bit, I do want to just say, I know we're about to hear in a moment from Lauren Haas, who's one of the co-chairs of our upcoming trip to Israel. We're coming to see you in March. And I say see you, Avi, because we will be seeing you on our very special trip coming up, Choose Your Own Adventure, in March. And not just you, but other experts of your quality. And we're so pleased to be able to bring this opportunity to the folks in Connecticut. Okay, so it looks like we have someone who is asking if you would please comment on the impact of the United States in both the current state of affairs and also in how you see the future, because you did focus quite a bit on the Crescent and everything that's going on with Iran, but how does the United States figure in?
Well, thank you for the question. As I mentioned earlier in my presentation, when you look at the US foreign policy in the region, one of the major things that I think characterizes very significantly the policy is this inner incohesiveness, sort of speaking, of the policy that stems from the fact that there is a constant built-in power struggle between ideal politics on the one hand and real politics on the other hand of the US foreign policy. I'll give you just a recent example of that. You all remember the story of the Saudi journalist Khashoggi that was apparently executed in the order of the Saudi heir, Mohammed bin Salman. You all remember the reactions within the American inner political system. There has been some sanctions imposed. There has been formal investigation. There has been ban of selling of weapons, offensive weapons from the States to Saudi Arabia and other things as a reaction to that specific story. But you also may remember that not so long ago, President Biden visited Saudi Arabia and met with MBS, which was kind of like giving some sort of like, clearance, sort of speaking, to that person. And that was an example, a very clear example of this difficulty to come up with more cohesive policy, because all the time there is this backlash between ideal politics and real politics. But in the end of the day, it seems like that at least if you really want to navigate and make an impact in the region or in any region, in the end of the day, you have to prioritize real politics over ideal politics, because in nature, inevitably, sometimes they are colliding, and you, as someone who wants to, in the case of the United States, for example, who wants to achieve strategic interest, you can't escape the need in the end of the day to prioritize one of the two and to bear the consequences that comes with that.
So building on the United States and its role as it pertains specifically to the JCPOA, as we're all watching, anxiously as to, if there is going to be a forthcoming agreement. Do you believe that that if the new agreement is signed, that Israel and the other Sunni nations would be able to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon? And what would they have to do so? And then just sort of building on that, sort of two for the price of one, we have another question around Iran's nuclear program and whether or not India and China specifically would respond one way or the other should Israel take decisive action.
Okay, obviously it's a large topic. I'll try to do it very shortly. I must say something about the story of Iran to really put it in the wider context. Iran's challenge to the region, the challenge Iran presents to the region is actually not only the story of the nuclear program. There are two other components that, as a fact, I can tell you that the Western negotiators are separating from the story of the Iranian nuclear program. Now, one can debate whether it's the right thing or not to do, but it has to be clear what are those two elements that adds to the story of the Iranian nuclear program. One element is the armed proxies that I described in my presentation. Iran built itself an external belt of armies that are scattered in the Middle East. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Afghans and Pakistani Shiite militias in Syria, Iraqi Shiite militias, the Houthis in Yemen, Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza Strip. The Iranians are saying those proxies are Iran's external defense belt. They are the first line, sort of speaking, in the Iranian perspective of protecting the Iranian interest, and the Iranians are using those armies as a deterrence tool and also as a tool that actually supposed to enhance Iran's expansion. Hezbollah's task in Lebanon, first and foremost, is not to destroy the state of Israel. That can wait. Hezbollah's first task appointed to him by the Iranian is to occupy and disintegrate Lebanon. Hamas and Islamic Jihad, in the Iranian view, first task is not to eliminate Israel, but to make sure that the flame of conflict will continue. And that is important to understand the significant role of the story of these armed proxies in the Iranian vision, in the Iranian perspective. The other element is the story of the missiles, the drones industry that Iran has developed. Iran developed this huge power of missiles, rockets, and drones. Basically, today, Iran is a dominant superpower in the region of the Gulf, it is using those capacities, either sometimes directly or through its proxies. So we got a triangle where you got the Iranian nuclear program, the Iranian external proxies of powers, the armies, and the drones and missiles capacities. And each of one of these components, they are interdialoguing one with the other. They're all supposed to provide one the other with external shield. The armies of terror are basically supposed to deter any action against Iran's nuclear project. The nuclear project is supposed to provide the umbrella that will enable Iran to continue its control and expand and deepen its control through its proxies in different parts of the region. The missiles and the drones are the weapon that's supposed to deter any attempt of anyone to confront Iran's hegemonic vision, particularly in the area of the Gulf. So this triangle has to be understood. It's interacting one with the other. There is a debate within the approach, the Western approach that separates Iran's nuclear issues from the other two components. There is a debate among military and intelligence experts whether this is the right approach or it's not the right approach. Israel actually all the time said to the Western negotiators, you cannot separate these things because they are interacting. The Western negotiators obviously has apparently a different perspectives on that, and there are arguments pro and cons to that approach. Iran, in my prediction, and I wrote it in the book, will not cross the threshold of rushing to produce a military weapon. One of the major reasons for that, maybe the major reason for that, is because China will definitely not be in favor of that. Because the meaning of that will be a Middle East that is going to become nuke. The next day, the Saudis said it very clearly. If Iran is going to have a nuclear military capacities, the next day Saudi Arabia will have a nuclear military capacities. With all the respect to the Western negotiators, the Iranians are very much tuned to the messages that are coming from China, first and foremost. And the Chinese don't want to see that. And they're right, they know why. It's not so healthy, in sort of speaking, to this region. So I think that it's important to emphasize what I just emphasized when we talk about the story of the Iranian nuclear capacities and the need to understand the nature of this triangle that the Iranians so sophisticatedly, unfortunately, were able to build in this region.
Thank you, Avi. You know, we had so many questions all focusing on various aspects of the issue around Iran. And I thank you for that very detailed answer. And I think we have many, many, many more questions, more than we have time for tonight. And I want to be able to bring Lauren Haas, our co-chair, for our trip on. I just want to say that for people who really want to take a deeper dive with Avi, they should absolutely join us. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend, Lauren Haas.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. Avi, I learned so much. I just get more and more excited for this trip every time we talk about it or I learn anything new. But I'm here to tell you about our trip. So hopefully a bunch of you are already registered to join us. We have about 130 people already set to do so. But if you haven't registered or you're considering it, I'm here to just give you a very few-minute overview. So hopefully if you're watching and you're going, this will get you even more excited. And those of you who are on the fence can learn a little bit more. So our trip is March 9th to the 16th. And the theme is Israel 2023, Choose Your Own Adventure. And what that means is if you remember the popular books from, I think, the 70s and 80s, there are 5 tracks for this trip. We have first-time visitors to Israel. We have art and culture, food and wine, geopolitics and coexistence, and then technology and innovation. And the way that will work is you'll see what each of these tracks is doing each day, and you'll be able to pick and choose. I want to do first timers trip Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but on Thursday, the food and wine excursions look great. And on Friday, I really want to deal with technology and innovation. So it's really your trip, but all the arrangements and decisions and plans have been laid out for you. So those are the 5 choose your own adventure tracks. Next slide, please. this is what's included in the trip. We have 7 nights in Israel in 5-star accommodations. At the end of my talk, you can see the website and check out all of the hotels, but they are fabulous hotels. Breakfast each day, most lunches and dinners. You can read your screen, but I just want to point out that we're getting VIP access to sites and experts, including Avi, and we are also going to be in Israel during its historical 75th birthday year. So that's a real opportunity that, that few will get to be in Israel in 2023. So we're really excited. Buses, program activities, and entrance fees, etc. What's not included is your flight to and from Israel. There'll be some tips that you'll need to make on your own if you want to purchase travel insurance. And if you want to join us afterward for the optional Morocco trip, that's also not included, or that's an extra fee, which you'll see in a moment. So the trip cost is $47.50 per adult. We're asking everyone to register through November 30th. If you pay your $500 deposit, it is refundable until October 1st. If you want to bring a child over the age of 10, there's a reduced cost for children or for a third person in the room. And if you want a single room, there's an additional cost. However, if you're traveling alone and you want us to match you up with another person traveling alone, we can do that for you. And by we, I mean all the fabulous people that work at the New Haven and Hartford Federations who are involved in this trip. Here's a little bit about the Morocco adventure, additional cost, and an additional 5 nights. You can reach out to Leslie with any questions in Hartford. You can reach out to Robin with any questions in New Haven. I'm tonight representing my husband, Dave Haas, and myself are the co-chairs from New Haven, and then Yitz and Juanita Moss are the co-chairs from Hartford. We're all available to answer your questions. We're all really excited. We've invested a lot of time and love into creating this trip for you, so we hope that you'll join us. And this is the countdown. The trip is in 182 days, so this is the website, and you can link to it. You'll see links to it from all the Hartford and New Haven emails and from the website, and we can send it to you if you ask us, and maybe we'll put it in the chat. Thanks, everybody.
So thank you so much, Lauren. I appreciate all of those that have stayed with us to the end. I want to give another hearty toda rabah to Avi for your incredible skills. We really appreciate you sharing that so generously with us. Lauren just gave a shout out to Dave and to Juanita and Yitz. We are so grateful for their leadership for this incredible adventure that's coming in March. And I want to also thank Gary Starr, Betty and Arthur Levy, the chair and co-chairs of the JCRCs of Hartford and New Haven. And I want to give a shout out to Laura Zimmerman and Josh Pernick from Hartford and New Haven, who lead our JCRCs. And with that, thank you all so much for sharing your evening with us, for keeping abreast of the issues and that matter so much to all of us. And we bid you a very safe and good night.
Shalom, and thank you so much.